welcome to Thinking with the Stars. This is Kevin Caldwell, and talking to us today about some interviews that occurred while Mercury was in hard aspects with Neptune. On December 19th of 2019, Phillip Goff did an interview with Jeffrey Mishlove about solving the problem of consciousness. And the problem of consciousness, it's called the hard problem because we can certainly tell a little story about why we feel pain. Maybe it's something to do with neurotransmitters and nerve endings. Or we can tell a little story about how we perceive reality, maybe something to do or how we perceive with our senses, so maybe something to do with light entering our eyes and creating an image in our brain that's interpreted. But when it comes to consciousness and the question of why do I feel anything at all, or why do I have any experiences at all, it's a little bit difficult to come up with a little story because it always seems to beg the question, if I can come up with a little story, who's the person reading the story, or who's the person understanding the story, who's the main character of the story, for instance, right? So it's kind of confounding for science. I know a lot of the academics, they do actually know. It's coming around to where they understand the answer to the problem of consciousness. For Phillip Goff, I know Mercury was square to Neptune. Neptune was in the fourth house and Mercury was in the first house, and this coincides with Phillip's kind of off-the-cuff definition of consciousness, which he had said it was our feelings and our experiences. So that makes sense. Fourth house feelings, first house experiences. And it is a kind of a Mercury and Neptune style problem because Neptune represents the void and Mercury represents our thoughts. So when we think about existence in a general sense, I think it's more than normal for us to come to kind of the butt of thinking, well, existence is nothing, and however, there's somebody having the experience, and who am I, almost, in these Mercury and Neptune aspects. Now, in that interview with Phillip Goff, he does go into this kind of the analytic idea of what it means for a claim to be scientific, where he would say that claims about consciousness, they're neither falsifiable nor verifiable. I think it was Jeffrey who kind of stepped in with this. I think it's, is it Popper? Neither falsifiable nor verifiable, therefore it's not a valid conjecture about science. We can't really say if it's not the sort of thing that we could have a false positive, we could have a false negative. So saying consciousness was our feelings. Well, I could have feelings and not be conscious, so therefore it's a falsifiable claim. Consciousness was our feelings. Well, could I be conscious and feel nothing? What would that be like if I was conscious and feel nothing? So there, I think it's not verifiable in that sense. So we're saying claims about consciousness aren't really verifiable. So they're not valid claims that science can make. So there was another interview, same aspect of Mercury square to Neptune. It was on November 14th, 2017. So going back a couple of years, This one was James G. Matlock, and he was talking. He gave this was one of 12. During this aspect was kind of the 4 last interviews he gave with Jeff about reincarnation. So Dr. Matlock's kind of a specialist in reincarnation, but here he's talking about karma, and he's saying that claims about karma are not scientific claims because they're not verifiable, they're not falsifiable. And so that's interesting. You got the kind of congruency here between the 2 aspects, the 2 interviews, the two planets, and they're both saying making a kind of a conjunction between these 2 ideas. So, on one hand, we're talking about consciousness and claims about consciousness. On the other hand, we're talking about morality and justice, universal justice. If we're talking about karma, we know what karma means. Karma, right? Instant karma is when I break a window on the street and I turn around and I get hit by a car. So it's sort of karma works quickly, but in this case, we find that karma doesn't work quickly, and I think that's what James Matlock was saying, or he's saying it doesn't work at all. It doesn't seem to be. And he gives a couple of counter examples, but I think in his conception that the idea of karma isn't really something that he is prescribed to or beholden to in his theory. So again, we have the same sort of conjunctions. It's an interview with Reza Jorjani on June 23rd, 2015. It's called Philosophy and Cyclical Research. And this was another square conjunction, Mercury being in the 6th house. And Jason Reza Jorjani, and I think he talks about history of philosophy over like a 10,000 year span. But at one point where he's talking about the French Revolution, and he says the failure of the cult of reason was the result of the people understanding that we needed a moral foundation. So in this context, we could kind of say the failure of Phillip Goff's need to have an analytical solution for the problem of consciousness and the failure of the concept of karma are kind of linked here at this moment in history where Jason Reza Jorjani points out that about the lack of a moral foundation. And I think we're definitely at a juncture at this time where the stability in society, things are so unstable. And I mean, I don't think we can expect people to act morally when they don't have what they need to survive. And so when we're talking about people in jail for robbery or theft, fraud, these sorts of like white collar crimes, I think it's plain to see people feel like if they need to bend the rules in order to get what they need to survive, that's on a different level. So the morality thing, and we're really lacking a moral foundation for a lot of things, and I think this aspect kind of brings that into focus, talking about the interviews that occurred, and so we're going to talk about. Those were 3 interviews that were conjunctions between Mercury and Neptune. And then the other 2 interviews were conjunctions between Mercury and Neptune, where hopefully it can give us a little bit of focus. So on April 2nd, 2019, it was a conjunction in the 10th house. It was Andrew Newberg, and the interview we did was called The Neurotheology of Judaism. And he was talking about how religious stories tended to make use of this, what he called the 2-brain binary operator. So religious stories are It's a matter of good versus evil. It's a matter of right and wrong. It's a matter of where they'll paint, they'll give us an idea of God and the devil, or on one each one on each shoulder, and always choosing to do the right thing, being the more religious claim. And so it's similar to what Phillip Goff in his idea of panpsychism. So panpsychism is the idea that where spirit exists, it's almost like that Native American idea of spirit existing in all things. And where we're bringing it into this unity, this oneness. That's how I can see the idea of monotheism with panpsychism. But this is kind of like, that's perfectly reasonable, but it's also like when we're talking about the failure of the French Revolution, there's no moral foundation, and we need to have a moral foundation. So it's not the idea of saying, okay, look, society will give people what they need to survive, but I can't steal. I can't rob somebody. I can't deal drugs. I can't fraud somebody. I can't. So these financial crimes, right? I can't commit the financial crimes because if I needed help, I could just ask for it. And it's like where the structure is crumbling, right? There's not with the amount of cost of everything and the help that we give, it's not balancing out. So we're getting really in these kind of it's unstable. It's not a stable state of affairs. Cultural differences. This is kind of where, so saying, okay, like, I understand the need to have rational explanations for things, but in kind of the postmodern age, theorists have to understand, especially like Caucasian male theorists, right? They got to understand that if we were looking at the theory from a different cultural perspective, it's going to alter the context is going to alter the meaning. So we can't just have information. We have information in a context that gives it meaning. When we alter the context, meaning the cultural, and this is kind of getting to the end here, framework. So when we alter information has meaning in a framework. And I think that's the answer that the academics already know about the problem of consciousness, is that physicality gives it the framework, and the spirit embodies the framework and gives it and customizes the framework. So we'll get to that there, but it's just interesting that Reza Jorjani was talking about Pythagoras and saying that Pythagoras was someone who was well-traveled. And because he was well-traveled and he had been immersed in different cultures, then he was somebody who wanted to understand the soul in itself, and not so much thought of the brain and how the brain operated, but the soul. And it is a fascinating idea, right? And I mean, in saying that, is it a scientific idea? Maybe not. Maybe it's a faith-based idea, or maybe it's in that kind of that third realm, metaphor, imagery, archetype. But yeah, Phillip Goff admits that the integrated information theory has the combination problem. And okay, so before that, sorry. The thing about the what is it called? The Philosopher's Stone. So basically, the Philosopher's Stone is right. So we're talking about Pythagoras wanted to consider the soul in and of itself because he was a well-traveled man. He knew that a lot of the explanations that people were giving for soul were culturally dependent, and in different contexts, we could have a different imagination of what soul meant, and it was just as true as if I went into a different cultural context and gave a different explanation of what the soul meant, then I would believe that. And so that was where he wanted to do this analytically, reasonably, and now we're saying that it's not really going to be. But one interesting thing is that in tribal cultures, they could plan to the reincarnation of somebody's soul that was going to come back. And so this sort of discipline, this is the discipline and the patience needed to kind of dedicate our lives to this sort of thing and really cut out a lot of the extraneous stuff. And then, like I said, Phillip Goff had mentioned the combination problem in the integrated information theory. And so the last interview I'm going to talk about, it's Russell Targ on March 4th, 2017, and the interview is called Highlights of Parapsychology. And he had published some books in a series, one of which is called Psychic Radio. It was by Upton Sinclair. And this is the book that really established the fact that psi, so we might say, okay, there's a physical framework and then psi, which is what James G. Matlock, the way he says, no, it's not archetype, no, it's not story, it's not narrative, it's the fact there's a physical framework, and then psi comes along, customizes the framework, or he calls it a template. So consciousness customizes the template, and that's what existence, that's what reality is for us. We're the template customized by consciousness, the physical template as customized by consciousness. That's what life is. But this Psychic Radio by Upton Sinclair was able to establish that, in fact, psychic functioning was not an analytic ability. So when I say remote viewing, or when I'm having these waking dreams, I can't read, I can't write, I can't do mathematics. It's a non-analytic. We get the general gist of it, right? So I guess that's a pretty great finding there, and this was the same thing of same sort of aspect, Mercury conjunct Neptune. So James Matlock, he's talking about how it's where was that one? Sorry, I'm looking for where I was talking about the Buddhist. At any rate, the stream of consciousness, according to James Matlock, was a mental state that didn't need any new. So Buddha had advised to check things out in an experiential way, that is via meditation, and so these are all kind of in response to the idea of the problem, solving the problem of consciousness, was an analytic process, but of course in waking dream states and in waking dream states and doing remote viewing and so on, psi doesn't have access to these analytic functions like reading, writing, mathematics. So we need to check things out in an experiential way, like in a meditation, and we know that we're in our place of meditation. We've found our that kind of higher, I want to say higher state of consciousness without being trite, but we kind of find that higher form of reality. We've tapped into a higher form of reality when we feel like we don't need anything. We're satisfied just with things the way they are. We're content, we're appreciative, we're grateful, and even though we don't understand, or even though we might not understand why there's injustice in the world, we feel like we've kind of made an arc from at one point when we were a paranoid and depressed infant, the first moment we were born, where we were tired and hungry and cold, or maybe hot, or just unhappy, and now we've made that arc, and now we're kind of like a well-adjusted human. So just a couple quotes that they give about kind of the answer to the problem of question, or answer to the problem of consciousness. Frameworks became important, according to Phillip Goff. Frameworks had practical significance, according to Jason Reza Jorjani. And consciousness customized the template of the body, according to James Matlock. So there's the 3 interviews we do where Mercury's conjunct with Neptune. And this is the part of the Neptune's transit in Pisces, which is ongoing. And so one last quote from Andrew Newberg. It was that there was a human need for connecting and transcending the self. So I believe this to be true, and I think there's still kind of 2 camps about it. There's still 2 camps about it. I guess in one camp we have where it's metaphor, it's archetype, it's this kind of allegory, I guess. And in the other camp, it's strictly dualist. So we have the consciousness, which maybe we could call it psi experience, that customizes the physical template of the body. So that's all I'm going to say for today. Thanks so much for listening, and hope we have a good rest of the day, and talk again soon.